When we revolt, it's not for a particular culture. We revolt because for many reasons we can no longer breathe. Oh, the good Mother Africa, the good old Mother Africa. What happened to you, Mother Africa? What happened to your resources? What happened to your children? What happened to your beautiful scenery? What happened to the mountains? Never think. Why are you sleeping? Why are you hallucinating, Mother Africa? What happened to you? When we revolt, it's not for a particular culture. We revolt because for many reasons we can no longer breathe. Now, these distressing words about revolt were the words of Frank Fanon in his distress when he contemplated about the masses that are suffering under the weight of colonialist oppression. All right. Africa is under siege, as we all can see, you know. And my spirit is just telling me to say something in this beautiful day. But the more I try to speak, the more I feel the garrote choking me. As dumbfounded as I am to think of myself in this rather lethargic state, the voice within me keeps taunting and urging me on. This has been the case since the turn of the century, the unending state of tribulation and the challenge to actualize a dream. The wailing voice keeps nagging nonstop and cursing at the damnable lack of transfiguration in low impact African academia. This factor, I believe, must be held accountable for Africa's incapacity to redeem, transform, and to address the material condition of the African people. Now I know that the deliverance of besieged Africa from this survivable travail has been, or is a task that has been entrusted to sublime African children. And I must confront untruth by speaking out. We are duty bound to justify our commitment to our African fatherland or motherland through all possible forms of potent gambits as predicated on the ancestral African laws. Exactly. That is what is happening now. I want to welcome you all, African children, or good people of the world, wherever you're watching this from, across Africa, our African family in the Caribbeans. I'm thinking of the brothers in Jamaica, in Grenada, in Barbados, St. Lucia, in Haiti, so many of you, I want to greet you all in this beautiful day. It's time for new reflections. I want to greet my African family in the United States, the African Americans who do not even want to be considered as part of Africa. They don't want to be associated with Africa in any way, even though they find nothing wrong when they are referred to as Black Americans. They know that they are not Black, but they prefer to be called Black as opposed to being called African Americans. They seem to have some type of problem with the word African. They don't want to be associated with Africa in any way because Mother Africa is in distress. Africa is in distress. Africa is wailing, and nobody wants to be around somebody that's wailing and weeping all the time. I can guarantee you one thing, that if Africa was what it was intended to be by the creator of this universe, all his children would be proud of it, and everybody would want to be associated with Africa. You will not need to force anyone to say they are Africans. You will not need to force those brown people. They are not Black people. Those brown people in America who are claiming to be Indians or who are claiming to be indigenes of the United States, what has become known as the United States, which is a very contested notion. You see, I'd like to raise this issue before I go on, just as an aside. These people that are claiming to be that are claiming not to be African American, but are claiming to be indigenes of America, they call themselves the foundational Black Americans, or whatever they want to say. It's up to them. You're free to say whatever you want to say. You're free to be whatever you want to be. I'd just like you to tell us, since you claim that you are indigenous, you say you are an aborigine, which is, you don't know how disgusting that word is, an aborigine. You are indigenous to America. We'd like to know the communities that you had in America. We'd like to know the names of the cities that you founded. You see, we'd like to know your ancestral names. We'd like to know everything about you because we have to study your story from a standpoint of continuity, a standpoint of cultural continuity. We want to understand your story. We want to know the extent to which your story is truthful. We don't dispute it. We just want you to give us a heightened understanding why we don't know anything about you, about your story in the United States, since you are the foundational person in America. And everybody else met you in America, but we don't know the towns that you founded. We don't know your ancestral names. If you had ancestral names, if you had towns that you founded, why are those towns not known today? What happened to you? Tell us about yourselves. Tell us more about you so we can know who you are. If you're not African, if you don't want to be associated with Africa, you see, we want you to tell us who you are. The brown people in America who insist every day that they are not Africans, that they are indigenes of America. They are not natives. They say that they are not natives. Keep in mind, a native is someone who was born somewhere, you see, but an indigene is someone who is inherent to that land, to that cosmic space. So that's a very brief difference I could make in that sense. We know the Indians that the Europeans have termed red. They call human beings red Indians. But when you call the Europeans pink people, they seem to take offense to that. But they give themselves the liberty, to call other people black, and they give themselves the title white. Not name the title white, because for them white is associated with some type of purity, a type of perverse purity, if you may. My camera is playing some type of games with me, so I hope you bear with me, All right. The Europeans, in essence, are pink, somewhat. You see, that is the closest you can come to giving them to giving a name to the color of the skin, because they seem to have a problem with always trying to identify people in terms of the color of their skin. And everyone should be proud of the color of their skin. All the folks that are putting tattoos on their bodies, I don't really understand that logic. You're paying someone, you're paying someone, to actually abuse your skin. You give them money, you give them money to paint on you, to put a stain for life on you. That's what you're actually doing. Now, the Indians in America, which is also contested, as a matter of fact, many of the things that we know in the world today are disputable because we don't know what happened. It's mostly the Europeans that have written most of the things that we have been reading in schools, in the school books, especially in Africa, That is why in Africa we look at ourselves through the eyes of the European devil. You see, whatever the European says is what we want to accept as the moral truth. Now, these people they call the Indians, they call them the American Indians. At least these people can be distinguished from the brown people who claim to be the indigenous or the foundational Black Americans. They call themselves the American Indians. You see, the Indians, whom the Europeans call the Red Indians, at least they have names. We see their civilization still ongoing. They have several names: Michigan, Wisconsin, California, Alabama, Wyoming, Nebraska, They have all these names. You see, Cincinnati. These are communities, these are towns that these people founded. The Indians, they have their names today. But the Africans who claim to be, or the brown people who claim to be foundational black Americans, as they like to call themselves, and they boastfully say these things without any remorse. You see, we want to hear from you. I personally would like to hear from you to tell me what happened to you. You say that those Indians were there with you. Sometimes you even claim that those Indians are pretenders, that they are not foundational citizens of that area. Mm? So you are questioning, you see, their sense of belonging to that area, sociologically speaking. But those people have names that are still existing to today, names that have been accepted as cities in America. These names are still existing to date. The Europeans came and they brought their own names, the New York, the I think Florida, those other names, North and South Carolina, you know, but that does not remove names like Dakota. They just added South and North Dakota, but Dakota is an Indian word. So I'd like to hear from you. Now, I want to reflect on something this morning. It's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful Sunday. Yeah. And it's time for reflection. While Africans like to go to church and sing praises to some type of God that they don't even know, they forget the African God and they are chasing after the God of their oppressor in the Catholic Church. You know, in Africa on Sunday mornings, especially in the areas that are supposedly Christian, as they call it, they need to come to Europe to see how empty the churches are on Sunday. But these are the people that brought that notion of Christianity to Africa. The Africans have accepted this as their own inherent social norm. Getting up in the morning on Sundays, getting into your best clothes, spraying the best perfume, and going to sing praises to the Most High. There's no problem with that. We grew up with that. See, it's like tradition for African people. But when I came to Europe, as a young boy, came to the university, there's one European that told me that your God is not our God. That is the day that I got stunned. You know, this man's daughter, was fooling around, messing around with me, and the man said he wanted to see me. So the daughter took me to the father, and the father told me this with a blunt look in his eyes. Your God is not our God. These are things that, makes you wake up. It jolts your conscience. It makes you wonder. So I started looking into this thing. I said, why would this man say this to me? All right. And because of that, I never wanted to deal with that female anymore because of that. you know, I said the Catholic Church, for instance, I'm not Catholic. I was raised as a Presbyterian in Africa. But I went to a Catholic primary school, and every morning they would send us to the Catholic Church. We go and sing praises in the mornings before we started school. Every morning, little children. You see, what was happening at the time was that we were being indoctrinated. We were being indoctrinated into accepting our abasement in front of the white supremacist leadership. You see, in a very covert way, as little children. We have to go to church every day. The child comes to school to learn geography, to learn history, to learn mathematics. No, that at the time it was arithmetic. You see, to learn all those subjects. But before we went to class, we had to go to the church. And they did a mass every day from Monday to Friday. Our parents did not even know about this. We were not Catholics, but we went to a Catholic school, so we were being indoctrinated, you see, in a way to domesticate our young and feeble minds. We never questioned these things. They never told us about the role of the Catholic Church, of the Roman Catholic Church, in enslaving the African people. Now, on the 18th of June, 1452, Pope Nicholas V of the Roman Catholic Church issued a papal bull called Dom de Vesas, you see, telling the Portuguese, to go and enslave what they call the Saracens, in what the Romans themselves came up to refer to as the Arabia, in North African area there. So they told the Pope Nicholas V signed this or issued this papal bull, authorizing Portugal, to capture this Saracens, or Islamic people today, if you want, and consign them to servitude, that is to say, bondage, to make them like slaves. Now, 3 years later, that same Pope, Nicholas V, issued another papal bull. This time, this one was called Romanus Pontifex in 1455. Precisely, I think on the 8th of January, 1455. This was the papal bull that authorized the Portuguese to capture everyone along the coast of Africa there and consign them to slavery. In other words, to make slaves of African people, sanctified by the Roman Catholic Church, the church in which we were forced to go to as little children to pray every morning to some type of God that we have no idea what he or she represented for us as little African children. That was the beginning, of the institutionalizing of our domestication as human beings in this world, our subservience to white folk. I've always been questioning this notion of slavery. Slavery. Well, they say slavery happened. I was never there. We read in the books that slavery existed, that Africans were taken from Africa to America as slaves. That's okay. That's what happened. We cannot dispute that. That's a hideous crime, whoever was involved in that. But the issue that I always questioned was this notion of trade. When they added trade in the name, then I began to wonder, why trade? Because trade itself presupposes some type of exchange. It could be material exchange, it could be some type of whatever kind of exchange you might think of. But slavery itself is about putting people, under duress. Owning people, depriving people materially. So slavery presupposes material deprivation of human beings. You don't own human beings. You want to own everything. You want to enslave everything. You want to domesticate everything. That is the European mindset. All right? So I've always questioned this notion of a trade. You have an exchange involving human beings as trade before you can consider a human being as a commodity, or you're commodifying human beings. You have to, first of all, dehumanize them. You have to dehumanize the human. That is to say, you diminish the humans to the level of a beast. That is what the Europeans have done to Africa. But this did not happen without the African people. I was always contesting this when I argue with my Caribbean friends, my Jamaican friends, and I had one friend from Barbados. He was always talking about, oh, you sold us, your people sold us. Well, I said, I didn't sell you, I didn't sell anyone. Oh, your people sold us, you didn't fight for us. I said, oh no, man, you don't understand. You are suffering from the same problems that we are still suffering in Africa till date. Nothing has changed. In the Caribbean, in Haiti, in Grenada, in Jamaica, in St. Kitts and Nevis, you're all suffering from the same problems that we are still suffering in Africa till date. European imperialistic oppression and domination. It's never changed. The oppressor never leaves. He never yields, or it never yields. You dig? The same problems. There are people that were involved in this. If it was trade, the reason why I was questioning this is that how would you, what did they give these people, the people that took away African people, that gave the African people away, what did they give them in return? You see, I always question this. And then after some time, I think I got to know that the town in which I grew up in Africa, I spent all my childhood going to school in that town. We used to swim in the sea, in the streams around, and we never knew about the history of slavery or slave trade in that town. And then we were told that in 1986 that they discovered a castle, a slave castle there in a place called Bimbia. It's quite depressing. I spent all my life and my childhood in that town, but I never heard about it. So I began to wonder how many more things have been hidden from the African children. This place is found inside this little town. It's a little seaside town, a beautiful coastal town. And the children don't know about this town. They're telling us that that place, the slave castle there, it was a rundown area, that it was discovered in 1986. And they show you pictures of it now. People go there now and make videos, and they go there and try to cry over what happened. The Europeans try to erase this from the minds of the African people. They try to erase the perverse role of the Roman Catholic Church in the hearts and souls of the African people, the distressed African people. They ought not to know about those things. These things have been hidden from the African people. Now we go to church every Sunday. The Catholic people, they pray in the church without knowing that it is the same Roman Catholic Church in which they are worshiping God in the image of their oppressor. It's that church that sanctified their slavery, that sanctified their enslavement, that sanctified their domestication by the adulterator, the outside oppressor that never yields. You dig? Now, if you wonder what happened to you as African people, if you wonder what happened to you as Caribbean people of African descent, if you wonder what happened to you as American or brown Americans of African descent, look at what is happening in Africa today. You don't need to go too far. Look at what is happening in Niger. Look at what is happening in Mali. Look at what is happening in Burkina Faso. Look at what is happening in Guinea. Look at what is happening in Cameroon. Now, you see, most of these names, look at what is happening in Nigeria. Okay, most of these names are European names, by the way. Cameroon is a Portuguese name, Rio dos Cameros. Nigeria is a European name. Liberia is a European name. Sierra Leone is a European name. Guinea is a European name, except for countries like Mali, Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso used to be they used to call it Upper Volta until Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary leader that was murdered by the imperialist devils, came to power. And the revolution changed the name from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, which means the land of the upright man. But you see, these countries have not rested ever since the days the Europeans set their foot in Africa. If you look at what is happening in Africa today, you have a picture of what happened in Africa when you were not even thought of to be in this world as a human being. The events in Africa nowadays are emblematic of the oppression that our ancestral forebears faced in the hands of the imperialist powers. There was summoned in Berlin by the German Emperor Otto von Bismarck between 1884 to 1885 to dismember Africa like a piece of cake. They call it the scramble for Africa. You see, the partitioning of Africa like a piece of cake. That's what he did. But this one came later. The partitioning of Africa came later. So these guys have been besieging Africa over and over and over. Africa has never rested in the hands of these devils. You see, Africa has never rested in the hands of these imperialist devils. Slavery, colonialism has never ended. You know, you don't speak of neo-colonialism when you still have colonialism. When colonialism never ended, how do you speak of neo-colonialism when those people are still there, harassing you, you see, dehumanizing you, domesticating your people and your children, trying to consign you to oblivion? Oh, this guy of the EU, Joseph Borrell, speaks of Africa, as the jungle, or he considers Africa probably as a jungle and Europe is the garden. What is the garden looking in the toilet of the jungle? Donald Trump refers to Africa as shithole countries. Donald Trump refers to Africa as shithole countries. Now, what are the garden elites? What are the garden elites looking or searching in the shithole of the jungle? What is in the jungle that's so valuable that the civilized people of the West are looking for? What is in that jungle? There must be something in that jungle that the Africans themselves don't know. You know why? Because these things that are found in that jungle have been devalorized by the oppressors. You tell Africans that they're so poor. You're telling the people of Niger that they're so poor despite all the resources that they have. I hope the phone is not disturbing. You're listening. The Nigerians, you see, as we are told, have the seventh largest uranium deposits, but the Nigerians are considered to be among the poorest of the poor. Fanon speaks of these people as the wretched of the earth, the people who don't count, the people whose lives are disposable. These are not human beings anymore. You put in a despot there. You put in an imperialistic despot who has no concern, no regard for his people. And when the people rise up to take back what is theirs, you want to go and reinstate this person, this despot, through war. You see, you want to go and reinstate the despot through war. You're telling the world that this man is democratically elected, so he has to be reinstated in power, even though he has been oppressing, depriving the masses, depriving the people who are supposed to have elected him in power. You see, you're telling the people you're going to intervene, regardless of what the people want, to reinstate this man in power because you have vested interest there, interest in a place that you consider as shithole. You see, a shithole, that's a very crude way to speak of someone or speak of something. It simply means that it has no value. It's a worthless place. It's a chattel that has no value. But then you are still there. You're telling the Africans that they are worthless. But these Africans have something that you're looking to get. You're looking to exploit these countries to the fullest. At the same time, you're trying to tell the Africans that what they have has no value. You see the way the Europeans think? That is exactly how they think. You see, they diminish you as a person and make you feel as if you have to look up to them as some type of God. They come in as saviors. To save you from what? To save you from yourself. To save you from your own delusional self. Because you have been persuaded into accepting persuasive self-enslavement as a social norm that guides your being as a human being in this world of materialistic perversity and self-interested deadweight. Now, there's this rumors of war, talking about war and rumors of war. This is the song of Peter Tosh. They talk about war and rumors of war. They don't talk about equal rights and justice. They don't talk about equal rights and justice for all. They talk about intervening to address the outcome of something that is more hideous, something that is more delicate to deal with. They talk about the outcome. They don't talk about the causality of what they observe at the present time. You know, this is the way the Europeans are tending to think. You see, everyone is talking about peace, but no one is talking about justice. Everyone is crying out for peace, and no one is crying out for justice. But there shall be no peace until man gets equal rights and justice. Equal rights and justice. These are the words of Peter Tosh in his song, Equal Rights and Justice. Beautiful, Peter Tosh. May the soul of this great African ancestor, Peter Tosh, find eternal exaltation. He did great things, you know. As I've said, if you ever wondered what happened to you as African children, look at the state of the African disorientation. You have Africans who are fighting against Africans. Africans who are fighting to keep Africans in slavery. You see, you have the giant, Nigeria. You see, the hallucinating giant that is led by a sleeping leader. You know, they call themselves the giant that has forgotten his own history, the misfortune of sociological misrepresentation, as I've called it in my work on interactive socialization. You know, Nigeria is a country that is teetering on the brink of implosion. Nigeria is a badly divided country. Nigeria is a tinderbox waiting to ignite. You dig? Nigeria has always been that way. So whatever you see, the peace that you see is not perpetual peace. You see, the peace that you see is just for the time being. The country is boiling. You see, it is boiling hot inside that country. So many things that we don't have time to talk about. I have time to go into all those things. I'm dressed in black because it's mournful when you think of Africa in the state of disorientation in which it is confined. The African children, they don't know where to turn to. They don't know to go to the left or to go to the right. They'll tell you, oh, I work at Oracle. See, boastfully, they tell you those things. I work at, Boeing, I work at NASA. You see, the African children running around the world telling you all these things. They tell you boastfully about all these things. They never tell you I work for Africa. They never tell you that they work for Africa. The moment you pronounce the name Africa, oh no, I have nothing to do with that place. I found a new home in California. You see, that is what they do. They call themselves all these names, these European names. I keep saying these things because I've written about this in my book or books, right? They call themselves, George Weah. Huh? They call themselves Paul Kagame, Paul Biya. They call themselves Robert Mugabe. They call themselves, so many of these people. Samuel Eto'o, George Weah. It seems as though if the Africans don't have this European name, they don't feel complete. You see, the Africans ought to feel ashamed if they don't feel embarrassed by what they do to themselves. It's persuasive self-enslavement. The oppressor is not there anymore to keep you confined in the state in which you are. Now you have your own people who see themselves in the image of the white man. You look at them. Frantz Fanon described this very well in his book, White Skin, Black Mask, or Black Skin, White Mask, which is tells a story of, colonialist oppression, what this has done to the minds of the African people. Black Skin, White Mask, African or the black people, as you call them, who see themselves in the image of the oppressor. You look into the mirror and you don't recognize yourself. You look into the mirror and you see a European staring back at you, and you get scared by the image of the person that stares back at you. You know why? Because you're not in alignment with the cosmic forces that govern the structure of your society. So you don't feel at home in your own house. You don't feel at home in your own continent. You always want to run away. We are all running away from Africa. We are all trying to look at Africa with scorn because the oppressor scorns Africa from dusk to dawn. This has to stop. You have African leaders. For those of us who were not there during the times of the slave trade or during the times of colonialism, when it started, we were not there, but we are witnessing this in the present day. We're seeing these things unfold in our eyes, in front of our eyes. Look at Alassane Ouattara, you know. Look at Alassane Ouattara, a potentate, you know, an imperialistic potentate, was kept his people in check like an expeditionary force, going to speak on behalf of the African people, declaring war on the brotherly African nation that has done no harm to his country. He is not even from the Ivory Coast. We are told that he is from Burkina Faso, but he was put in power in Cote d'Ivoire by the French imperialistic forces who are still there. They have a military base. I think they have about 1,500 French soldiers stationed in Cote d'Ivoire. They toppled Laurent Gbagbo, you see, and he has been in power. He served 2 terms, and now he has changed the Ivorian constitution. He called it the first term of the Third Republic. Look at this. Look at all this nonsense. You fought a serious rebellion against a leader. You toppled this leader with the help of the French, and now you're refusing to leave power. You want to die in power. And you've given yourself the liberty. You give yourself the liberty to go and speak on behalf of the people, declaring war on Niger, telling the Africans that you're actually sending 1,100 Ivorian soldiers to go and die. You're sending the children of the poor to go and die in Niger while you're sitting there whining and dining with the French criminals. You see? These people have always been in Africa. These traitors have always been in Africa. Frantz Fanon even speaks about them. He spoke of Houphouët-Boigny as a traitor, the African parliamentarians that were traitors. Fanon decried this problem a long time ago, back in the 50s, you know, when the African struggle for liberation was gaining grounds or gaining currency across the continent and across the minds of the people. Now, there is a distressing poverty of sanity when a man like Alassane Ouattara takes it upon himself to go and speak in front of soldiers about declaring war in Niger. Now, the politicians make the decisions to go to war, but the rational calculation of utility about that decision to go to war is supposed to be made by soldiers, not the politicians. You get what I'm saying? Pay attention to what I'm saying. The politicians make the decision to go to war, but the rational calculation of utility as regards that decision to go to war rests in the hands of the soldiers, the commanders. You can see the soldiers sitting down, sitting quiet. And Alassane Dramane Ouattara is declaring war. You could see he was scared, he was uneasy when he was declaring this. He's saying he was speaking on behalf of the people of Niger. You see, that they're going to protect the people of Niger. But look at what is happening to the people of Niger. They are in a close fraternity, a tightly knit community with the soldiers. So they're acting in one accord. They're working in tandem with the soldiers. You want to go and dislodge the soldiers. You want to go and reinstate a man who has been deposed by the community. That was not a coup d'etat. It's a coup d'etat. If it was, it's a coup d'etat that has been legitimized by the people. So it has become legal. This has to be told to people like Alassane Ouattara and all these African despots. You see, that are holding Africans backward and telling Africans to stay in the prison of disorientation, which I call obscurity. You see, which is a state of confusion that should inspire the need for clarity and a quest for an opportunity to decipher the meaning of circumstances. Now, why are we in the state in which we are? The Africans have to ask themselves these questions. Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, now Niger. What is the unifying factor in all of these countries? France is a French colonies. I would not say former, they are French colonies. That's number one. Number two, they're military leaders running these countries. What has happened? You have to look at the factors. You see what caused this. You don't go and try to solve a problem whose cause you don't know. You don't solve a problem when you ignore the cause of the problem. It's like you're trying to put a band-aid on a wound without cleaning the wound, and you think you're going to treat the wound. You know, you're trying to solve a problem whose causality you barely understand or barely acknowledge. You're not going to solve any problem. You can send 1,000, 1 million soldiers to Niger. You will not be able to pacify Niger. By the way, soldiers have always been involved in the pacification of societies. The European societies were pacified by soldiers. You see? So don't give a damn what to tell you today. You see, soldiers have always been actively involved in the pacification of societies that were distressed. You see, politically embattled nations, sociologically shattered societies, and psychologically distressed people in those societies were given a new lease on life by soldiers. I'm not speaking of any kind of soldier. I'm writing about, or I wrote about a soldier in my new book, my latest book. I speak of the reformed soldier. It's a special type of soldier in this type of intervention. The coup d'etats that we are witnessing in Africa nowadays are not the kind of coup d'etat we witnessed in Africa witnessed in the 60s. These are coup d'etats that are actually accompanying the civilians, you see, accompanying the people to glory, to freedom, you see, freedom from autocratic domination, freedom from despotic manipulation, you see, freedom from oppressive domination and callousness, you see. Alassane Ouattara has to be reminded by the soldiers that when you speak of a coup, you did a coup yourself. You're talking of a military coup, but there is a political coup that you did. Because anyway, a coup d'etat is essentially political, but there is an institutional coup d'etat that you've done in your country. You've changed the constitution. You know, you have not respected the constitution, and you're speaking of going to Niger to restore or to reinstate constitutional order when you did not respect that in Cote d'Ivoire. You're changing term limits to stay in power. That is an institutional coup. We have to look at what happened in all of these countries. What happened? What happened in Guinea? What happened in Mali? What happened in Burkina Faso? And what happened in, or what is happening now in Niger? You see, when you look at the stages of institutional change, you see, it's very simple. Institutional exhaustion. You know, a coup d'etat is an abrupt, a coup d'etat is an abrupt, a delicate and violent change of power, government power. Before this institutional change can happen, which I call displacement. It's about institutional displacement. Before this institutional displacement can happen, there has to be what you call institutional conversion. These are the stages of institutional change. You see, there has to be conversion and there has to be exhaustion. Exhaustion is the final stage, in the in the realm of institutional change. The institutions of these countries have been exhausted, including the institutions in Nigeria have been exhausted. And then you have the omnipresent outsiders, you see, lurking around, looking for a place to get in, to exploit these weaknesses in these countries with the help of the local political elites. The Nigerians have opened the door, they're inviting themselves into a conflict that is not theirs. The country is teetering on the brink of implosion, sociological implosion, cultural implosion, and of course, spiritual implosion. It's afflicting the Nigerians as a country, as a whole. You think? They don't want to understand. Not that they don't want to understand. They are intentionally ignoring what is going on in Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, and Niger. They don't want to think about it because they have bought into this conspiratorial type of integration which is being imposed by the outside oppressors upon them, which only generates immoral dependencies, as I've argued. You know, now these countries are countries that harbor people who have been victimized by this conspiratorial form of integration, which is called France-Afrique, which is a kind of integration that is very vibrant in the real jungle of obscurity. You see, these people in these countries that are governed by soldiers now, these people have been victimized. It is this shared victimization that is bringing them together. You know, now shared victimization under the hegemonic exercise of power tends to create an airtight bond of victimhood across a transboundary community of victimized peoples. When these people think that they're victimized, that victimization tend to bring them together. That is why you have the Malians coming up to say, if you attack Niger, we find it unacceptable, so we are going to intervene on behalf of the Nigerian people, not the Nigerian people or the Nigerian government. The Burkinabe authorities are saying the same thing because of shared victimization. That's it. This is exactly what the French do not seem to understand. Now you find French political elites and even military leaders who are insensate. They have no clue about what is going on, which is emblematic of betrayal of your own people in France. You see, you find a French former general, like Dominic Trinquant or Trincant, whatever way he pronounces that name. He comes up and says that, ECOWAS ECOWAS has the upper hand because Niger and Mali, because Burkina Faso and Mali will not be able to defend Niger. The reason it said was that these countries don't have the capacity, they don't have the soldiers, they don't have the manpower to support Niger. So ECOWAS has the upper hand. This is a general of the army in France saying this. This general is called Dominic Trinquant or Trinquant. You cannot believe it. Coming from a soldier, coming from a top-ranking official or a top-ranked officer in the army, retired, but he's a soldier all the same. See? And then you have others like I don't know. These names they keep going away from me. Let me see. There was somebody I followed some commentaries that were made by. Okay, was a man called Vincent Hugo. Hugo was saying that. What did he even say? He was saying that the Nigerian army, when it comes to the deployment of soldiers in Nigeria is going to take the lead because the Nigerian army is powerful and well equipped. This is what the French are saying about Nigeria. But what these people don't tell the Nigerians is that they supported Biafra to dismember Nigeria in the 60s, in the late 60s. During the Biafra War, it was France. France was the main European power that supported Biafra against the Nigerian government. That was led at the time by General Yakubu Gowon, you see. And Niger was a very staunch ally to Nigeria. So Niger actually helped to keep Nigeria in one piece. You see, Niger helped to keep Nigeria as a government, a very loyal ally to Nigeria. So these very people that sponsored the dismemberment of Nigeria through Gabon and Ivory Coast, they're now rubbing shoulders with this new Nigerian president called Bola Tinubu, rubbing shoulders with the devil. They're rubbing shoulders. Tinubu, he goes in France and is walking hand in glove with Emmanuel Macron, who's out to destroy Nigeria. But Tinubu doesn't know these things yet. The same thing that did Sarkozy, same thing Sarkozy did to Gaddafi in Libya. Muammar Gaddafi was rubbing shoulders with Sarkozy, oblivious of the fact that Sarkozy was the man that was out to kill him. And of course, Sarkozy ended up assassinating Gaddafi. Tinubu is rubbing shoulders with France, but France is a country that actually helped to dismember Nigeria during the Biafra War. I have to take it slowly. Nigerians have to be very careful about what they're getting themselves into. You have to be very careful. You have to be warned. I have stated that Tinubu, what you're starting there, you're not going to be able to end it because the French people are luring you. You see, they're luring you into a trap. They're not entrapping you. You are going into that trap by your own volition. You know, they have entrapped Niger, but you're walking into your own trap with your eyes wide open. The giant that is in a state of deep hallucination. That is what Nigeria is. Walking into a trap with your eyes wide open. You're smiling with someone who's trying to kill you, smiling with someone who's trying to destroy your nation and your people. You're giving your country as a leeway to go and destroy your own brothers. You see, you're trying to embrace a fratricide of war that is sponsored by your own oppressor, someone who's out to domesticate you, Tinubu. That's what you're doing. And what I'm surprised about is that the Nigerian people don't even they speak like I'm speaking now, but they don't revolt. You see, because as Franz Fanon said, as I started with this discussion, when we revolt, it's not for a particular culture. We revolt because we can no longer breathe. Now, if the Nigerians no longer breathe, if they can no longer take what Bola Tinubu is doing to Nigeria, they have to take on the streets. They have to revolt because that's democratic participation. It's not just about voting. Whether or not you voted Tinubu in power is not the question here. The question is you have to think about being included in the decisions that have been taken to send your country into war. You see, it's about social inclusion, it's about public consultation. You know, if you know that these things have not been done with you people, then you have to revolt. It has to be recalcitrance in your country. It's just logic, it's basic logic. But I want to say something to the French. Emmanuel Macron, you will be remembered as the man who presided over the total death of the French colonial empire in Africa. Emmanuel Macron will be remembered in history as the leader who presided over the death of the French colonial empire in Africa. That's it. When France is losing ground, it started with Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, Niger, and it's going to continue. You have to look at the trend. Look at the trend. What is going on? I've advised these French leaders in my work on interactive socialization. I've advised the French leaders in my books that they should go away from this confrontational ways of dealing with people, not only African people. They should go away from all this boastfulness and be a little bit humble. Take humility. You see? Take humility as a social way of interacting with people. That's it. But they never listen because they've been used to all these years of dominating African people, oppressing African people. So that error has become normalized in their judgment. It's okay. It's okay to go and enslave African people because the Roman Catholic Church sanctified you to do that. So it's okay to do it and no one's going to complain. But you see, there's time for everything. Fanon stated each generation has the moral obligation, you see, to stand up for itself. I'm just paraphrasing. Hmm? Those are the things. It's just a question of time. You know, you have to look at what you're doing wrong, Emmanuel Macron. Look at what France is doing wrong before you lose everything, because you're going to lose. You can send all the soldiers of the United States Army, all the soldiers of the French Army, you can send them to Niger. You will not be able to win this war, because this war is not just a war. This war is a spiritual rehabilitation. When you study structuralism, you will see empires disappear, sometimes for hundreds of years, but empires reappear, reemerge when the time is right. So this should be a time when you should try to, you know, broker new deals. Say to yourself and look, okay, I did wrong? You see, I did wrong. You know, let me look at other ways to do things with you, so we can actually save some, save some dignity. Because if you send your soldiers to Niger, those soldiers that are in Niger, they can't do anything, because the war that you're looking for is not going to be the kind of war that you think you're going to fight. You're going to fight a war that you regret living your life in this world. If you fight against African people, it's not going to be a war by the soldiers. It's going to be a war by the people. The soldiers will be told to step aside. People who have not shot a gun would learn how to shoot a gun to stand up for themselves. That is how it's going to be. So you don't start this kind of war, because it's going to be not just a regional conflagration. It's going to be a full-blown continental conflagration. It's going to be a big bloody war, and you're going to run away. So we can see that what is happening in Niger, we can see that someone is trying to run away from somewhere. Someone is trying to run away from somewhere. Remember, when the United States was pulling out of Afghanistan, the French defense minister at the time, Jean-Yves Le Drian, was actually begging the Americans to stay in Afghanistan because France could not stay there alone. What makes you think that you can fight in Niger? Niger is 27 million people. Now, if you take the population of Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Guinea, only those four countries, you have about 90 million people, 90 million potential combatants that you have to fight with, because it's not going to end. You say you want to build a pipeline to go from Nigeria across Niger all the way to Algeria and to Europe. How can you build a pipeline when you're not in good terms with the local people? How can you do that? You can take and take from people and you don't give nothing back, and you don't expect the people to react. Gorbachev said it, you cannot continue to humiliate the people and think it will not have consequences. Your own leader, what's his name? Jacques Chirac. Jacques Chirac warned you. There are videos on YouTube. Jacques Chirac warned the French that you have to give back to Africa. He said it, that a very significant portion of the French wealth, or the wealth that is enjoyed by the French, comes from Africa, comes from the material deprivation of African people. So you have to have the good faith. He insisted on that word. The French have to have the good faith, not the generosity, but the good faith to give back to the people what you have taken from them. You don't want to do that. Instead of reflecting on what this, contemplating on what Jacques Chirac said before he passed away, you are insisting on entrapping African people through political intrigue, through gaslighting, through sophism, and through all types of manipulation, vile manipulation, to start a war, thinking that in that chaos, in that state of African disorientation, you're going to continue doing what you've been doing for the past 600 years. You have been in Africa for 139 staggering years, taking and taking from Africa and keeping the people in poverty. You know, like I said, there's time for everything. Walter Rodney actually said that these African nations that you've been oppressing since time immemorial, these countries were assigned special tasks. He began with his own country, Guyana. He said that Guyana was assigned the task of producing sugarcane. Senegal was assigned the task of producing groundnuts, and Ghana was assigned the task of producing cocoa. Now, how long is that going to last? These countries are your plantations, these are your chattels, because relations of identity were never affirmed in this country south of the Sahara, as you affirmed relations of identity in Algeria. But even in Algeria, you were forced out through a brutal war, the war in which Fanon took part. Fanon was sent there by the French government to work in Algeria, but when he got to Algeria, he saw the sufferings of the Algerian people in the Kasbah and all those places, and he decided that, look, I cannot take this anymore. He was a humane person. Fanon was a humanitarian, so he decided to abandon France and he started fighting on the side of the Algerians, and he became an outlaw in France. So Fanon finally died. He was a psychiatrist, he was like a doctor. He finally died and he was buried in Algeria. I think his wife, Rosie Fanon, is buried in Algeria too. I think I have to verify that. But he came from the Martinique. He came from the Martinique in the Caribbean islands, what you call the West Indies. So you continue doing the same things over and over and you're expecting a different result. It's quite sorrowful, isn't it? Distressing poverty of sanity. You see, a sorrowful absurdity when you think about people who are supposedly civilized. People are supposed to have all these philosophers, the Montesquieu, you see, the Jean-Jacques Rousseau, you see, the Voltaires, all these people. You find the people who have had all these great philosophers struggling to survive, struggling to redefine relations with other countries. Fanon said it. That's why you don't like it. That's why you outlaw all his books in Africa. Fanon said it, that France finds itself an enemy of its conquest, incapable of removing or detaching itself from it, and incapable of defining new relations. Fanon, you should have listened to Fanon. You should have listened to Frantz Fanon, but your ego will not let you do it. The same type of ego that you have in Nigeria. See, the Nigerians are suffering from that ego, the vast ego. You see, the abundance of ego in Nigeria. There's two things, the abundance of ego and the scarcity of peace in Nigeria. The abundance of ego makes you vulnerable, you see, makes you vulnerable to what? What is that? Can anyone say it? The abundance of ego makes you vulnerable to what? Huh? Distraction. You see, when you have a vast ego, you are easily distracted. You call yourself a giant, you see, and everybody around you is a midget, but your brain is as small as the brain of those whom you call midgets around you. The abundance of ego makes you vulnerable to distraction. You see that? And the scarcity of peace, makes you susceptible to luring baits. You're easily trapped when you have scarcity. That's why you find animals when they're looking for food, they easily fall into a trap. You trap an animal with a bait. You see? That is what they're doing in Nigeria. Nigeria has no peace. There is scarcity of peace in Nigeria. Nigeria is running into this trap by itself. There's scarcity of peace. You have the Boko Haram up there. You have this problem in the south. You have all types of tension in the country, but you're running into a trap all by yourselves with your eyes wide open and with your vast ego that makes you distracted. You're distracted. You hang around with your oppressors that are intended to entrap you, that are intended to put you in a corner, but you don't realize it because you're distracted. You are distracted and you're going into this trap with your eyes wide open because of the lack of peace. I speak of the peaceful dialectics, you know, in my book, in my latest book, I think volume 2, Peaceful Dialectics, I think it's chapter 16, if I'm not mistaken. It's talking about war all the time. They're running about war. You find generals from all these ECOWAS countries. You see generals with no political education. You know, Sankara said it very well. You see, a soldier with no patriotic education is a dangerous criminal. That is what those soldiers are. Those officers, the generals, the colonels running to Nigeria there to go and declare war against the people of Niger, against the Nigerian army. Well, you know, you would hit the wall. You would hit the wall. You've never fought a war. You've been fighting insurgencies and rebellions and all those things. You've not fought this kind of war that is coming to Nigeria and coming to the ECOWAS countries. So you better prepare. It's not going to be a piece of cake. It's going to be a bloody war that you're going to regret ever starting. You're trying to light a fire that you will not be able to put out. See that? So be careful. Now, I was saying something about peaceful dialectics. You see, what is the relevance of war? Do you want to tell us that war has no meaning? What is the relevance of peace? You have to look at the two. You know, they're very much interrelated. Like Nigerians are drunk of peace. And when you get drunk of peace, you start dreaming of war. That is how it is. So war is not entirely void of virtue. You need war to be able to experience peace in its intrinsic value. You know, this is what I write. I mean, I will not say much about these things, and because you see, Africans sometimes when you start to talk so much about all these technical aspects, they'll tell you get to the point. They want you to go quick, get to the point. They want to hear you summarize. Okay, you know, say war is not good, and you say quiet. Okay, I say war is not good, but war is not entirely void of virtue. You see, the Africans, they want you to say that. They don't want you. They don't have the patience to listen because they always have something to say. They always want to say something, and they always want to do something that is not connected with their own survival. You know, because they've been trained that way. That's how it is. It's quite sad, you know, if you think about these things. You know, peace is a necessity if no, sorry, war is a necessity if peace is to be seen as virtue. You need war to understand the peace that you seem to have, and you don't have no respect for that peace. You need war because when you have war, you start begging for peace. You know, I've written about these things in my books. I'm not going to take the whole day explaining these things because I only refer whoever is interested in reading about this stuff should take the patience. It's a big book. It's about 500 and how many, almost 600 pages. That's the second volume. The first volume is smaller. That's the theoretical section. The second volume is about using the things I discussed in the first volume to operationalize the discussions in the second volume. You know, those are the things I'm talking about. You know, Africans don't read, and you try to make things easy for them. You know, you try to make things easy for them by explaining this stuff to them, but they don't read. You have soldiers who have no idea about politics, soldiers who have no idea about interventionist politics. You see, they sit there, they have all these meetings, they don't weigh the pros and cons. You're going to Niger. Do you know what you're going to do? Hmm? They don't weigh the sociological ramifications of what they're intending to do. They're listening to the outside oppressor who barely knows that society. That person the outside oppressor employed militarized bureaucracy to impose value or value system on people that he barely knows. That is why we have all these problems in Africa. You see, we have all this sociological fragmentation in Africa, which is responsible for the fragmented consciousness that we have in Africa. because we are following things that were not intended for us in a very cosmic sense. So we are not in alignment with our own structure. The Europeans are telling us what to do. You know that you have your brother in Niger, you see? The Nigerians know that they have their brothers in Niger, but the white man is coming there to tell you to go and attack those people, and you're actually buying that. The reason is because your mind has been altered, you see? So the errors in your judgment have become normalized as a consequence because you've been domesticated. You can argue all you want. You can fight the battle of ideas all you want, but take a moment to reflect on these things I'm saying. Don't just take it for granted. Take a moment to reflect on these things in a very quiet way. Contemplate on them, and you would see that these things are very valuable in your own personal survival in this world. When a country has a close-knit fraternity, no soldier should be advised to entertain any idea, any notion of intervention in that society, because any type of intervention in that society is bound for disaster. I'm not saying anything new. These are things that are widely known, but no one is talking about it. Even the soldiers who are, they're nourished by greed, they're nourished by militant avarice. They don't see because they're distracted. They are distracted. The Nigerian soldiers are distracted. The Ivorian soldiers are distracted, but they are the ones that are being sent to war by this imperialistic despot, sending the children of the poor to go and die in a war that these children barely know nothing about. The Ivorian soldiers are going to be sent to fight in Niger without actually knowing exactly why they're going there to fight. You're going to fight to reinstate a leader. At the same time, you have a leader. The man who is sending you to go and fight and even die in Niger is the same man who has violated the constitution in your own country. So charity begins at home, isn't it? That's what the old time people used to tell us when we were little children. You know, if you seek justice, you should come with clean hands. If you seek justice, you should come with clean hands. Your hands are soiled with the blood of humans. You've killed so many children, so many humans, so many innocent people. I remember Tagro. Tagro took a bullet in the mouth. Tagro was a very close aide to President Laurent Gbagbo. Tagro was serving in Laurent Gbagbo's government. He took a bullet in the mouth and his mouth was shattered. Then he later died. You are the same man, you see, that is telling the Ivorian soldiers to go and fight in Niger, and you're boastfully declaring war. In what capacity? In what capacity are you declaring war on Niger? Who are you to declare war on Niger? What gives you the moral authority to go to talk about war in Niger? You have none. You don't have the legitimacy even in Cote d'Ivoire. You have violated the Ivorian constitution, Mr. Alassane Draman Ouattara, and you are out there speaking on behalf of the African people. That's an insult. That's a grave insult. And you could see that he knew that he was doing something immoral, and he was breathing heavily because he was scared to say these things. You have to be scared if you're not embarrassed by yourself to do these things to the African people. You're working, siding with the oppressor to murder African people. You've been doing this since time immemorial. We've always had people like this. Now, people criticize Mr. Biya of Cameroon, but one thing that Mr. Biya would ever be remembered is that he never takes part in this type of nonsense. He never takes part in these things. No country has been able to establish a military base in Cameroon. You can say whatever you want. No one has been able to establish a military base in Cameroon. Cameroon has never, when the French wanted to go and attack Nigeria, the Cameroonian president at the time was Amadou Ahidjo. He refused the French from using the Cameroonian territory as a base from which the airplanes of the French military would take off to go and bomb Nigeria. So Cameroon has never participated in destabilizing any African nation. No, they don't do that. Instead, they have been intervening to assist the rehabilitation of those societies that have been shattered by violence. So those are the things, Africans, we have to understand these things. We have to work together as one. We have to work in tandem because all these countries that we see today, Nigeria, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, Gambia, Uganda, Zimbabwe, these countries never existed. These are all European constructions. You see, the Berlin Conference of the perverse imperialist powers, you see, they created this so Africans see themselves in the image of these devils. You know, they call themselves the European names that have no meaning to their cosmic essence. What does the name? How do you say Paul Kagame? What is the meaning? What is it to those two names today? They don't even agree. Paul Kagame, eh? George Weah. Those two names don't go together. They don't go together. The Chinese don't do that. You'll never find a European, no matter how beautiful the name Weah sounds. You'll never find a European naming his son Weah. You'll never find that. No matter what George Weah did in Milan. You see, you'll never find an Italian supporter of Milan giving the son the name Weah. But Africans will call themselves Madini. Madini, Kagame, Madini, this and that, Sorry, I'm just using the name Kagame because it's a nice African name. Nice African name, which must be preserved. You see, it must be preserved. We don't need all these European names to come and soil our African names, our African cultural valuations. You see, we don't need these things. We need to be together. We need to feel for our brothers because the people that are suffering in Niger have the same problems that are faced by the people that are suffering in Cote d'Ivoire. And this is the same story everywhere. The people that are suffering in Nigeria have the same type of problems as the people that are suffering in Mali because they're all under the pressure that is put on them by the imperialist devils. Africa is in dire need of rehabilitation. We don't need all these wars. You see, you beating drums of war when your country itself is teetering on the verge of implosion. The French are trying to persuade you to get yourself into the trap. The French are persuading the Nigerians to get into the trap. And the Nigerians are actually walking wide eyes open into that trap, calling themselves giants. We're the giant of Africa, the giant with no teeth in the mouth. The giant needs real teeth. You're a giant walking after the oppressors, to kill your own people. You should be the one to tell these oppressors, no, we have to solve these problems ourselves. We don't want you in this problem. But you are there. The ECOWAS is being sponsored by the Europeans. The African Union is being sponsored by the Europeans. So what kind of power do you actually have? You're the giant. Can you not sponsor ECOWAS? Are you going to remain beggarly peoples forever in this world? With all the wealth that you have. Now you want to build a pipeline. You want to build this pipeline and you bring the Europeans to invest money there. And when the Europeans come to get their money and you say you don't have the money, they're going to attack you. Can you not build your own pipeline? If you have all this gas and and you know what the gas, how important the gas is to the Europeans, why don't you export that gas to African countries? Why don't you use the gas to, elevate the life or the material conditions of the African people? Why must that gas only go to Europe, Nigeria? Why? If you have all that gas, why don't you use the gas, to supply African countries that are suffering so we can become self-sufficient? We can use it to industrialize. We can use the gas to motivate ourselves to actually fight for our self-determination, which is an institutional, is fighting against an institutional constraint, domination and oppression, which are institutional constraints. We can use this gas like our motivating factor. Look, this thing unites us so we can fight to liberate ourselves so we can actually benefit from our resources by ourselves. You don't do that. You're supplying Europe, but you want to go and fight to kill African people in Niger. But what you expect the Europeans to have is to give them something that is going to make their lives in Europe better. You're preaching death to your own people, but you're preaching life and survival for the European that is out to oppress you, out to domesticate you, out to dismember your country. There is a sorrowful absurdity in that type of thinking. What kind of giant are you? What kind of giant are you? Now, I've written about this ogre. You see, the ogre who goes through African societies with ghoulish delight. These are ghouls. The ECOWAS leaders are ghouls. You see, they want death. They like blood of the African people. This elephant is going around killing people in Africa. But the Africans rise up one morning and put a stop to the ghoul. They put a stop to the ogre. The ogre is a wandering interloper, has no place to stay, is moving from one place to another until it finds one place and it settles down in that place. In that place where this ogre settles, it starts to create problems for the local people or the locals in that area. So these people in that area thought of this ogre with his ghoulish delight as one of them without actually knowing that this ogre was out to kill them. You read about these things in my book, Garrison Metropolis, Volume 2. Well, I've been rambling for over an hour. Oh, time goes so fast. There's so much to say, but things that need to be said about Africa. So again, I want to greet all of you and I want to thank all of you for having the patience to listen to the things that I have to say. Uh, I have underlined some aspects that are important, maybe not for you, but I think they could be important for others. And you just take what you think is important. I'm not into making YouTube videos and forcing people to subscribe. No, I'm not into all that. I'm not a YouTuber. You see, I don't make videos and telling people to subscribe. It doesn't matter for me if one or two people watch it. I don't really bother. You see, as long as one person watches it and tells somebody else about this, that's good enough. That's good enough. As long as one person watches it and shares the story with his brother and sister, that's good enough for the African people. In this way, we can actually help in dealing with our state of African disorientation, which is giving us a lot of trouble in this world. You see, diminishing us and reducing us to, a state in which we should not be proud of. We have so much in this world to elevate ourselves. We have so much in this world, to become great, to make our societies great, so that those people who are calling us shithole countries, should look at us and say, oh, I made a mistake. My original thinking about these countries or these people was incorrect. So we can actually encourage those Africans or those brown people in America who claim not to be associated with Africa to try to look at Africa with a different type of eye. You see, say, look, well, this place is not what I thought it was. That is what has to be satisfactory to the African people. So as I leave you this day, I want you to take this with you, that no one is going to save you when you fall into a pit. But then, when you don't have justice among people, you're sowing the seeds of discord. You're sowing the seeds of a revolt, you see, in society. I'll leave it at that. Have a blessed, blessed day. All right.